chosen one, you keep looking back at that door, not because you want to walk through it again, but because a part of you still doesn't understand why it closed. Maybe it was a job you were sure was yours. Maybe it was someone who was supposed to stay. Maybe it was a plan you built for years, one conversation, one decision, one moment away from becoming real, and then it wasn't. And ever since, a quiet question has been sitting somewhere in your chest. Did I lose that, or did I fail to hold on to it? Here is something you were never told at the time. You didn't lose that door. It was closed, on purpose, by something that could see what you couldn't. That sentence might feel strange to hear right now, especially if you've spent months, maybe years, replaying the moment it shut, wondering what you should have said differently, wondering if you weren't ready, wondering if you simply weren't chosen. But there is a difference between a door that closes because you failed and a door that closes because you were being protected. And most people never find out which one actually happened to them. They just carry the ache and call it regret. This is not going to be another video telling you everything happens for a reason and leaving you exactly where you started. You've heard that sentence before. It didn't heal anything because it never explained why. So we're going to do something different here. We're going to go back to that door, not to relive the pain of it closing, but to actually understand what was happening on the other side of it. In the moment, you couldn't see anything except loss, because there's a pattern in these closed doors that almost nobody notices until much later. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Not just in that one door, but in every door that's ever closed on you. Here's the first thing worth sitting with. Doors don't usually close before something. They close because of something. There was a reason for the timing, not a random, careless timing, but a precise one. And the pain you felt wasn't proof that you were unworthy. It was proof that you actually wanted something, that you had hope, that you were reaching. Nobody grieves a door they never cared about. The fact that it hurt is not evidence that you did something wrong. It's evidence that you were alive inside that moment, fully invested, fully hoping. And that matters more than you've probably given yourself credit for. But there's a deeper layer here. Because closed doors don't just test what you wanted. They reveal what you were standing next to. What was actually behind that door, not what you imagined would be behind it, what was really there. Sometimes we don't get to see that until years later. Sometimes we still haven't seen it. And that's part of what makes closed doors so disorienting. You're asked to trust a decision you weren't shown the reasoning for. That's the part almost nobody prepares you for. You wanted an explanation. What you got instead was silence and a locked door and a life that kept moving forward without an answer. So you filled in the blank yourself, and most people fill it in with blame. I wasn't good enough. I said the wrong thing. I waited too long. I should have fought harder. But here's a question worth asking honestly, maybe for the first time. What if none of that was true? What if the door wasn't closed because of something missing in you, but because of something waiting for you on a road you couldn't see yet from where you were standing? That doesn't erase the pain of that moment. It reframes it. And there is a very specific reason certain doors close exactly when they do. Not too early, not too late. We're going to walk through that. Because once you understand the timing, the closing stops looking like rejection and starts looking like something else entirely. But to understand that, we have to go back further than the moment the door shut. We have to go back to what was happening in you, quietly, before you even knew that door existed. Before that door ever came into your life, something else was already happening. You were being shaped by things you didn't ask for, disappointments that didn't make sense at the time, waiting seasons that felt like they were going nowhere, moments where you wondered if you were being forgotten. Most people assume those seasons were wasted time, empty space between one chapter and the next. They weren't empty. They were preparation you couldn't recognize as preparation, because preparation rarely announces itself. It just feels like struggle until later, when you finally understand what it was training you for. This matters because the door that later closed on you wasn't disconnected from that earlier season. It was connected to it in a way you probably still haven't traced. Think about who you were the moment that door shut, what you valued, what you were willing to accept, what you thought you needed in order to feel secure or chosen or enough. Now think about who you are right now, after everything that's happened since. Different person, different priorities, different understanding of what actually matters. That shift didn't happen by accident. It happened because that door closed, not despite it. Here's something worth considering honestly. If that door had stayed open, if that opportunity, that relationship, that plan had gone exactly the way you wanted it to, would you still be the same person you were back then? For a lot of people, the honest answer is yes. And that's uncomfortable because it means staying in that old version of themselves, carrying the same fears, the same blind spots, the same unfinished growth, just with a different label on it. Sometimes what looks like loss is actually interruption, a pause placed exactly where it needed to be placed, so that you wouldn't walk further into something that would have cost you more than you could see at the time. This is where most people misunderstand their own story. They assume that if something was meant for them, it would have felt easy, and if it closed, it must have been wrong for them from the start. But that's not always how it works. Sometimes something can be right for a season, and still not be right for the rest of your life. Sometimes a door is closed not because it was a mistake, but because it had already done what it needed to do, even if what it did was simply teach you something about yourself you couldn't have learned any other way. What are you currently trying to stop forcing? What door have you been pushing against, hoping if you push hard enough it will finally open again? Sit with that question honestly for a moment, not to answer it out loud, just to notice what comes up. Because there's a pattern in the way closed doors work, and it usually looks like this. First, there's resistance. You don't want to accept that it's over. You keep looking for a way back in. Then there's grief. The realization sets in, and it hurts more than you expected it to. Then, if you let it, there's a slow, quiet shift. Not because the pain disappears, but because you start noticing things you couldn't notice while you were still standing at that door, waiting for it to open. You start noticing what you were spared from, what you were freed from, what you would have missed had that door stayed open. That noticing doesn't happen overnight. It happens in stages, usually so slowly you don't realize it's happening until you look back and realize you don't ache the same way anymore. If you're still in the resistance or grief stage, that's not a failure. That's simply where you are right now. But there is a shift coming, and it usually starts the moment you stop asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and start asking a different question. What was this closing making room for? That question is where the next part of this begins. Part 3, the shift plus signs plus deeper revelation. There's a moment that happens to almost everyone who has lived through a closed door, and it usually catches them off guard. It's the moment you find yourself thinking, if that door had stayed open, I wouldn't be here right now. And here doesn't mean where you physically are. It means who you've become, what you've learned, what you finally understand about yourself that you didn't understand back then. That moment is not an accident. It's a sign. It means the closing did exactly what it was meant to do. Let's talk about what was actually happening in that closing. Not the version you told yourself out of pain, but a more complete version. When a door closes at the exact moment it does, it's rarely random. It's often because staying on that path any longer would have delayed something else, something you couldn't see yet, something that needed you to be free, unattached, and ready to move, instead of still holding onto a door that had already served its purpose in your story. This is where the phrase "on purpose" in that closing starts to make more sense. It wasn't closed to punish you. It wasn't closed because you weren't good enough, weren't trying hard enough, weren't worthy of it staying open. It was closed because your story needed to move, and you were the only one standing in the doorway, still holding on to something that had already finished its role. That's a hard thing to accept, because it means the pain wasn't a sign of failure. It was a sign of transition, and transitions almost always hurt, even the ones that are leading somewhere better. Here is something worth noticing, if you're willing to look back honestly. Are there people in your life now that you wouldn't have if that door had stayed open? Is there a version of strength in you now that didn't exist before that closing forced you to find it? Is there clarity you have today about what you actually want that you didn't have back then, when you were still convinced that door was the only way forward? These aren't small things, they're signs. Quiet, easy to miss, but real. What changed in your life that you still don't completely understand? Sometimes that unexplainable shift is the clearest evidence that something was working behind the scenes, long before you had language for it. There's a deeper layer here too, one that's easy to overlook. Sometimes a door closes not because of what's on the other side of it for you, but because of what would have happened to someone else or something else had you stayed. Sometimes the closing protects more than just you. It protects the timing of everything connected to you, people you haven't met yet, opportunities that hadn't formed yet, versions of your life that needed you to arrive somewhere else at a different time, in a different condition than you were in back then. You weren't just being redirected, you were being prepared for a version of your story that required you to let go of an earlier one first. This is usually the point where the old ache starts to soften, even if it doesn't disappear completely. Because understanding why something happened doesn't erase that it hurt, but it changes what the pain means. It stops being proof, that you were rejected. It starts being proof that you were being moved, carefully, towards something that required you to be free of what was behind that door. There is still one more layer to this, though, because understanding why the door closed is only half of the picture. The other half is understanding what it means for the doors still in front of you, the ones you haven't walked through yet, the ones you're still unsure about, the ones you're afraid might close on you the same way. That's where this has to go next. So let's finally answer the question you came here with. You didn't lose that door. Losing implies carelessness, something slipping away because you weren't paying attention, weren't trying hard enough, weren't enough. That's not what happened. That door was closed, deliberately, at the exact moment it needed to close, because your story required something on the other side of it that you couldn't have reached while you were still standing there, waiting for it to open again. That's what on purpose means. Not random, not cruel, not a punishment for something you did wrong. A decision made with more information than you had, about timing, about readiness, about what was still ahead of you that required your hands to be empty of what was behind you. Think back to the words in that title. You didn't lose that door. That was never really about the door itself. It was about your identity, proving to yourself once and for all that closed doors are not verdicts on your worth. God was closing it on purpose. That word purpose is the whole answer, not chaos, not chance, a closing with intention behind it, even when you couldn't see the intention at the time. Here's what this means for you now. The next time a door closes, and there will be a next time, because that's simply how growth works, you don't have to spiral into the same old questions. You don't have to ask, what's wrong with you? You can ask a different question instead. What is this closing making room for? You may not get the answer right away. You didn't get it right away the last time either. But you now have proof, real proof from your own life, that the not knowing eventually turns into understanding, that the ache eventually turns into clarity, that what once felt like abandonment can, in time, reveal itself as protection. What would your next chapter look like if you stopped treating every closed door as evidence that you're not chosen, and started treating it as evidence that you're being led somewhere more specific than you could have planned for yourself? That's not a small shift. That's the difference between living in regret and living in trust. You were never meant to walk through every door you saw. Some were only ever meant to teach you something, then close so you'd have both hands free for what was actually meant to stay. So if you're still standing at that door in your mind, still wondering what you did wrong, you can let that question rest now. Nothing was wrong with you. Something was being arranged for you. And maybe, just maybe, the reason it hurt so much is the same reason it mattered so much. If this reached something in you today, let it settle for a moment before you scroll away. And if you know someone still standing at their own closed door, still blaming themselves, this might be the reminder they need too. You didn't lose that door. It was closed, so something else could finally begin.